Have you ever wondered why some countries just seem to collapse into poverty, even when they're sitting on a gold mine of resources? While other places, with way less going for them, absolutely thrive. You know, it's one of the biggest, most important questions in economics. And today, we're going to break down the anatomy of exactly what makes an economy fail.
And believe it or not, the answer might just be hiding in this famous line from a novel written almost 150 years ago. This is Tolstoy's Anna Karenina Principle, and it's not just great literature, it turns out, it's a perfect way to understand modern economics. All successful economies are alike in some really fundamental ways, but a failed economy? Well, it can break down for any number of reasons.
So, to see how this whole principle actually works, we're going to start with a pretty unexpected example. It has absolutely nothing to do with money and everything to do with farm animals. Yeah, seriously.
Okay, so the writer Jared Diamond used this exact framework to figure out an old puzzle. Why have humans only ever managed to domesticate a tiny handful of animals? Well, it turns out for any animal to even be a candidate, it has to clear every single one of these hurdles. It's got to have an easy diet, grow fast, be okay with breeding in captivity, all the way down to having a calm personality. If it fails on just one of those points, the whole thing's a no-go.
And this right here is the key takeaway. For success, everything has to go right. But for failure, you just need one thing to go wrong. It's why we don't ride zebras. They're just too aggressive. Or herd gazelles. They panic way too easily. One fatal flaw and the entire project is doomed. Keep that idea in your back pocket.
So, how in the world does this idea of a single fatal flaw apply to entire countries? Well, that brings us to the real heart of the matter. It's about institutions, not geography. For a really long time, the general thinking was that a nation's success was basically a lottery. You know, were you lucky enough to be in a nice climate? Did you have good soil, maybe some valuable minerals underground? This idea basically suggested that a country's destiny was pretty much out of its control. But modern economics has completely flipped this on its head. The consensus now is that all those uncontrollable things, your geography, your natural resources, they matter way, way less than the things a country can control. And the single most important factor? It's a country's institutions, its laws, its government, its whole social structure.
And this is it. This is the fatal flaw for an economy, the single point of failure. Economists call them extractive institutions. These are systems, laws, political setups, even social norms that are specifically designed not to create wealth for everyone, but to suck it out of the hands of the many and funnel it directly to a small, powerful group at the top.
Now, this isn't just some abstract theory. Let's look at how this plays out in the real world with some incredibly powerful examples of countries that have been either made or completely broken by their institutions. I mean, if that old geography is destiny argument were true, the Congo should be one of the richest places on the entire planet. It is fantastically wealthy in natural resources. We're talking diamonds, gold, copper, you name it. It's the perfect test case for this whole idea.
But instead of prosperity, what happened was a masterclass in extraction. After a coup in 1965, the new leaders built a system designed to do one thing: siphon off the nation's immense wealth. It wasn't invested in schools or hospitals. It was spent on massive palaces and private airports for the elite. Property rights for regular people were just eliminated. The wealth wasn't shared, it was taken.
And the result? A complete and utter economic catastrophe. The country experienced hyperinflation of 4,400%. Now, to put that in perspective, a civil servant's entire monthly salary was only enough to buy about half a week's worth of flour for their family. The system had totally failed its people.
Now for the flip side, let's look at one of the clearest natural experiments in all of history: North and South Korea. After the war, they started with the exact same history, the same culture, the same geography, but they chose radically different paths. North Korea built the ultimate extractive state. South Korea, on the other hand, chose to protect property rights, invest heavily in education, and open up to the world. And the results? Well, they're so different you can literally see them from space.
So, we know these extractive institutions are devastating in normal times. But their true, fatal weakness really gets exposed when a country is put under pressure. They don't just bend, they completely shatter.
You can think of an external shock, like a hurricane, a pandemic, a war, as a stress test for a country. These events don't just create failure out of thin air. Instead, they act like a giant spotlight, revealing all the weakness and the rot that was already there, festering just under the surface.
A tragic but perfect example of this is the 1970 Bola cyclone. It was the deadliest cyclone ever recorded, and it slammed into what was then East Pakistan. But the natural disaster was made infinitely worse by institutional failure. The central government's response was pathetic, and it even blocked foreign aid from reaching the victims. The public outrage that followed was a direct trigger for a war of independence that created the new nation of Bangladesh. A natural disaster, compounded by a failed state, literally ripped a country in two.
And then there's war, another kind of man-made shock. In our modern world, it is never, ever economically justifiable. The old idea of conquering a place to steal its resources just doesn't work anymore. This number, $126 billion, is the estimated economic loss from the conflict in Yemen. The destruction of modern capital, technology, and human lives far outweighs any possible gain.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time looking at the anatomy of failure. If that's the diagnosis, what's the cure? What's the blueprint for one of those happy, successful economies?
Well, the answer is building the complete opposite of extractive systems. They're called inclusive institutions. And hey, remember those hurdles for domesticating animals? The exact same logic applies right here. For an economy to work, it has to clear every single one of these hurdles. It needs political inclusivity so people have a real say. It has to protect property rights so people feel safe enough to invest and build. It needs to educate everybody to unlock its full human potential. And critically, the system has to reward hard work and new ideas, not just corruption and who you know. Failure in just one of these areas can sink the whole ship.
So when you really boil it all down, a nation's prosperity doesn't come from what's buried under the ground. It comes from the choices it makes. The choice to build systems that are there to serve and empower all of its people, not just a select few.
And that, of course, leaves us with one final big question. We have the blueprint. We know what causes economies to fall apart, and we know what helps them succeed. So why is it still so incredibly difficult for so many nations to actually escape that trap of failure? That's the challenge that remains.